All right, today we're breaking down a really raw and personal testimony from a writer who goes by the Appalachian Guerrilla. This is a steel town story that really gets into the weeds of street-level loyalty versus organized religion, and it asks a pretty tough question. Who are we really supposed to help?
Wow, okay. So he just comes right out of the gate with that one. He's not saying it's some kind of universal truth, right? But for him, this is his truth. It's a raw, personal feeling that really sets the tone for everything he's about to tell us.
So, before we can even get to the main point he's making, we have to understand his world. Every story has a setting, and for this guy, that setting, a Pennsylvania steel town, is absolutely everything. It's what made him, his friends, and his entire way of looking at loyalty and faith.
We're talking about the boroughs right around Harrisburg, Pennsylvania. He paints this picture of a place that's kind of stuck between your typical middle-class suburbs and what he calls blue-collar row hometowns. This is the world he comes from, the backdrop for his life and the lives of the guys he calls his brothers.
And when he talks about the people he grew up with, well, it's a pretty grim picture. In his telling, so many of them ended up as addicts, dealers, convicts, or worse. It's a stark reality that just hammers home this feeling he has of being one of the very few lucky ones who actually made it out.
He even has a name for these friends, broken humans. He calls them people who have fallen through the cracks. And he's not naive about it. He admits a lot of their problems were self-inflicted. But he also argues they just never had the kind of support system that could have kept them on a better path.
And to make sure this doesn't just sound like a bunch of statistics, the author really zooms in on one deeply personal story. It's about a man he's known since they were little kids playing t-ball, a friend he calls his paisan, that Italian-American word for a close friend, a countryman.
Man, the story of this guy's life just shows you how fast things can completely fall apart. At 18, he had a ticket out, a basketball scholarship. But then one single event, a really bad car accident that broke both of his legs, and that future just vanished. The path forward was gone, and the only road left led right back to the old neighborhood, to dealing drugs, and eventually to an 8-year prison sentence.
But here's the thing. Despite that fall, the bond between them was just unbreakable. This wasn't some casual friendship. We're talking absolute loyalty. The author talks about how his friend would show up for him no matter what. And he gave that loyalty right back, standing up for him in court, having his back in bar fights. It's a bond that was forged in some seriously tough times.
And this gets him to the central paradox he sees over and over again. In his experience, it's these broken humans, the people who have next to nothing, who are often the most generous. He talks about them taking in stray people, stray animals, sharing whatever little they have. It's this powerful contradiction that becomes the foundation for his whole argument.
So this contrast between the unconditional loyalty he finds on the streets and what he sees somewhere else, that brings us to the real heart of his testimony. He's using these personal stories not just to reminisce, but to launch this really sharp, pointed critique of the very faith community that he grew up in.
And this is where you can feel his frustration just boil over. He points out that his friends aren't orphans, they have families. But what he sees is that these families, who are often very devout Christians, treat their own struggling kids or cousins or siblings like a mess that someone else should clean up.
The contradiction that really gets to him is just stark. He lays it out side by side, the professed beliefs of the Christians he knows versus the actions he actually sees. And it's this painful disconnect, right? People who feed the homeless but let their own family starve. People who build homes in other countries while their own relatives have no roof over their heads.
And this right here, really gets to the core of his personal bewilderment. He sees himself as a guy who knows the Bible, but who's also walked through some pretty dark stuff on the streets. And from that unique point of view, the idea of just discarding your own family, it's something he just can't wrap his head around.
So, faced with this contradiction, what does he do? Well, in response to everything he's seen, the author basically rejects what he sees and creates his own code to live by. It's a simple, personal philosophy that's all built on one thing: absolute loyalty.
And look, he's the first to admit he's a hypocrite himself. He smokes but tells his kids not to, that kind of thing. But he says there is one line he will never, ever cross: abandoning his own people. He would never, he says, go help strangers while his own family is hurting.
His philosophy isn't some big, complicated thing. He boils it down to this simple, powerful creed. It's a direct, action-based promise to his brother. There are no strings attached, no moral judgments, just 3 basic acts of care. If he's hungry, I'll feed him. If he's tired, I'll give him a place to rest. If he's cold, I'll clothe him. Simple as that.
And so this all leads him to a really painful personal conclusion. Based on everything he's witnessed, he just feels like he can't be part of a group whose actions, as he sees them, so totally contradict his own personal code of loyalty. So he makes the choice to stand apart.
And at the end of the day, the author's story really forces us to ask ourselves that same question. What does it truly mean to be your brother's keeper? Is it about charity for strangers, or is it about an unbreakable, unconditional loyalty to your own people, no matter how broken they might be? The author doesn't give us an easy answer, but he sure leaves us with a raw and powerful way of looking at it.